A television studio is not a place built for honesty. Every camera angle is chosen. Every laugh is timed. Every silence is filled before it becomes uncomfortable. And yet, on a random weekday morning, in front of a live audience and millions of viewers at home, Mark Consuelos said something that was not scripted, not softened, and not walked back. He said he would rather stay in a marriage with no love in it than lose his dog. The studio laughed. Kelly Ripa laughed. And for a few seconds, it looked like nothing more than a couple bantering the way couples do when the cameras are rolling and the stakes feel low. But if you slow the moment down, if you take away the studio lighting and the audience applause, what is left is something far more revealing than a joke about a dog. It is a small, almost accidental confession about what actually holds a 30-year marriage together once the romance stops being the headline. Mark and Kelly have built an entire public identity around being unfiltered with each other. They interrupt one another mid-sentence. They correct each other's stories. They needle each other about old grudges that stopped mattering years ago, but still make good television. So when Mark made his joke, most viewers process it the way they process everything else the couple says on air, as harmless comedy between two people who've been doing this long enough to know exactly where the line is. But comedy, especially the kind built on decades of shared history, rarely comes from nowhere. It comes from something true, exaggerated just enough to be safe to say out loud. And what was true in that moment was not that Mark wanted out of his marriage. It was that his marriage had reached a stage where jokes like that no longer carry any real danger, because the foundation underneath them is no longer in question. To understand why that joke landed the way it did, you have to go back to where Mark and Kelly actually started, because their relationship did not begin the way most celebrity marriages begin. It began on a soap opera set, which is, in its own strange way, one of the least private places two people could possibly fall in love. Kelly was already an established presence on All My Children, playing Haley Vaughn, a character audiences had followed for years. Mark arrived to play Mateo Santos, a role introduced specifically to give Haley a new love interest. The show's writers built a storyline around chemistry they assumed they could manufacture. What they got instead was chemistry that refused to stay fictional. Mark and Kelly began a relationship off-screen, while their characters were still working through a scripted one. And within a year of meeting, they eloped to Las Vegas. It was 1996. Kelly was in her mid-20s. Mark was not yet a household name outside of daytime television. Neither of them had any indication of what their lives would eventually become. What followed was not a slow, curated rollout of a celebrity romance. It was real life, arriving quickly and without much warning. Their first son, Michael, was born in 1997, just a year after they married. Their daughter, Lola, followed in 2001, and their youngest son, Joaquin, in 2003. In a span of less than a decade, Mark and Kelly went from newly married soap opera co-stars to parents of three, building a household, while both of them were also building careers in an industry that rarely accommodates family life gracefully. Kelly's career trajectory, in particular, was about to shift in a way that would change the entire shape of their marriage. In 2001, she was chosen to co-host Live, with Regis and Kelly stepping into a chair that had been vacant since Kathy Lee Gifford's departure. It was a launching point that eventually made her one of the most recognizable and durable faces in American daytime television, surviving format changes, co-host transitions, and more than 2 decades of live, unscripted television, a genre that punishes anyone who cannot think and react in real time. That kind of career creates a very specific kind of pressure inside a marriage. When one partner becomes a fixture of a widely watched daily program, their public identity can start to overshadow the relationship itself. Audiences begin to know one half of the couple far better than the other, and the partner who is not sitting behind the desk each morning has to decide how they fit into a life that is now partially public property. Mark handled that dynamic in a way that, in hindsight, looks deliberate, even if it did not feel deliberate at the time. He continued building his own acting career, appearing in television and film roles that had nothing to do with Kelly's platform, while remaining close enough to her world that their marriage never became defined purely by his absence from it. For years, that balance held. He was Kelly Ripa's husband in headlines, but Mark Consuelos in his own right in casting rooms and on set. Then, in 2023, That balance changed. Mark stepped into the co-host chair permanently, transforming live. With Kelly and Mark from a program hosted by Kelly and a rotating guest into a program built around an actual married couple, sitting side by side, 5 mornings a week, in front of a national audience. This was not a small adjustment. Plenty of marriages could not survive that kind of proximity, let alone thrive under it. Working alongside a spouse strips away the natural separation that most couples rely on. The ability to leave frustrations at the office. The ability to have a bad day privately before bringing it home. Mark and Kelly do not have that buffer. Whatever tension exists between them has nowhere to hide, because the show itself runs on their willingness to let the audience see the friction along with the affection. That context is what makes the Lena joke worth examining more closely. Lena is not a metaphor invented for a headline. She is a real dog, a rescue the family has spoken about warmly on air, and by all accounts, she has become something close to the emotional center of the Consuelos household now that the couple's 3 children are adults living their own lives. Michael, Lola, and Joaquin have all grown into their 20s, each pursuing their own paths outside the family home. That transition, the shift from a house full of school schedules and teenage noise to a house that is suddenly much quieter, is one of the more difficult and under-discussed stages of long-term marriage. Psychologists and family researchers have written extensively about the recalibration couples go through once children leave, a period sometimes referred to as the empty nest transition, where partners are forced to rediscover what their relationship looks like without the daily structure that parenting provided for decades. Some marriages struggle in that stage because the couple realizes they become co-managers of a household rather than partners to each other. Others use the space to reconnect. What Mark and Kelly appear to have done, at least based on how they discuss it publicly, is fold that transition into the same humor that has defined their relationship from the beginning, with Lena stepping into the role their children once occupied as a shared responsibility that keeps their daily life anchored to something outside themselves. Understanding that context changes what the joke actually means. When Mark says he would stay in a marriage with no love in it just to keep seeing Lena every day, he is not describing his actual marriage. He is describing, in an exaggerated and self-aware way, how deeply the small, unglamorous details of a long partnership can matter more than the version of love that gets sold in movies. Early relationships run on intensity. They run on newness, on the thrill of discovering another person, on the fear of losing something that has not yet had time to become permanent. Long marriages run on something else entirely. They run on infrastructure, on shared history, on inside jokes that would mean nothing to anyone outside the relationship, on knowing exactly how someone takes their coffee or which argument they will bring back up during a stressful week. Mark and Kelly have had almost 30 years to build that infrastructure, and the joke about Lena is, underneath the comedy, an acknowledgement of just how much of their bond now exists in places that have nothing to do with romantic intensity and everything to do with familiarity. This is also, in a strange way, a defense mechanism that only works because of trust. Comedy about a marriage failing only lands as harmless when both people involved know, without needing to say out loud, that failure is not actually on the table. A newer couple joking about a loveless marriage would create discomfort because the audience and possibly the couple themselves would not have enough evidence to know the joke was safe. Mark and Kelly can make that joke specifically because they have accumulated 3 decades of counter-evidence. They eloped young. They raised 3 children while building separate careers. They navigated one partner becoming a nationally recognized media figure, while the other continued working in a notoriously unstable industry. They eventually chose to work side by side every single day, a decision that could have exposed every fault line in their relationship on live television, and instead it revealed a partnership steady enough to turn potential tension into their most reliable source of material. There is also something worth noting about what this reveals specifically about Kelly, since the framing of Mark's comment has often been discussed as an admission about her rather than about their marriage as a whole. Kelly Ripa has spent more than 2 decades doing a job that very few people could sustain. Live, unscripted daily television requires constant mental agility, the ability to pivot instantly, to fill dead air without panic, to manage guests, timing, and audience energy simultaneously, often while processing personal news in real time, because that is simply part of the format. Entertainment journalists who have covered her career, including longtime television critics who followed her transition from All My Children into daytime hosting, have consistently described her as one of the more demanding on-air presences to work opposite. Not because she is difficult, but because she moves fast and expects the people around her to keep pace. Mark did not marry that version of Kelly. He married a young actress on a soap opera set in the mid-1990s. Before any of that career had unfolded, what his joke ultimately reflects is not frustration with who she became, but an acknowledgement, delivered through humor because sincerity in that format would feel out of place, that keeping up with her has required a specific kind of confidence, one that does not need to dominate the room in order to remain secure within it. That may be the most accurate answer to what audiences have suspected for years, without being able to name it precisely. It was never really a suspicion that their marriage was in trouble. It was a suspicion that keeping pace with Kelly Ripa, professionally and personally, required more from a partner than most people could offer, and that Mark had somehow managed to do it without becoming resentful, without disappearing into her shadow, and without needing to compete with her for attention. His willingness to be the punchline, to let a joke about a dog become a viral headline implying trouble in his marriage, is itself evidence of security rather than instability. A man genuinely uncertain about his relationship does not make jokes on national television suggesting it could end over a pet. He makes that joke because he knows exactly how far it can travel before anyone takes it seriously. And the answer for Mark and Kelly is not very far at all. What makes their story compelling is not that it avoided difficulty. It is that difficulty was built into it from the start. They fell in love while playing fictional lovers, a premise that has ended plenty of other on-screen romances the moment the cameras stopped rolling. They started a family before either of their careers had fully stabilized. They spent years managing a marriage where one partner's job placed her in front of millions of people every single morning, while the other worked in an industry that offers no guarantees. And eventually, rather than protecting their relationship by keeping their professional lives separate, they chose to merge them completely, sitting beside each other for hours of live television each week, betting that whatever they had built privately over decades could survive being performed publicly on a daily basis. So far it has, not because they have avoided conflict, but because they have found a way to turn conflict into something the two of them share ownership of, rather than something that quietly erodes a relationship from the inside. None of this means their marriage is without friction, and nothing about Mark's joke suggests otherwise. What it means is that after nearly 30 years, friction is no longer something they have to hide. They can joke about custody battles over a dog because the real custody of a life built together, 3 children raised, careers sustained, decades of public and private history accumulated, was settled a long time ago. Mark Consuelos did not admit that his marriage is loveless. He admitted, almost by accident, that love after 30 years does not need to announce itself the way it once did. Sometimes it looks like an inside joke about a dog named Lena. Sometimes it looks like 2 people who have learned exactly how to tease each other without ever actually letting go. And sometimes a clearer sign that a marriage has lasted is not the absence of jokes about it failing, but the fact that everyone watching already knows the punchline was never true.